Hey everyone, this is Hajra. I was doing a Valentine's Day project last time, and this is another Valentine's Day project. You may not like every holiday, but actually holidays are a great prompt for creative inspirations. Older artists like Norman Rockwell and J.C. Leyendecker did this all the time. Getting all these sort of repeated themes and prompts was because they were doing them for holidays, whether it was New Year's or Christmas or Mother's Day. I mean, in fact, all these holidays, the way that we've come to think of them, they sort of became emblematic during that time, during the magazine publishing era, because before that, lots of people didn't really celebrate them as widely. So the sort of marketing and commercialization of these holidays happened actually a lot because of artists. Here we are carrying on that tradition, not with magazine covers, but with Twitch and YouTube videos. This is a Zig writer, and it says on here that it's acid-free, archival, it's pigment ink, not dye-based, and also to store it horizontally. So I do store it horizontally, and I have used it for lots of art because I know that it's pigment-based and archival, and it doesn't run when you wet it, so you can go ahead and ink your piece before you start. It also has two tips, one very fine one at this end. And despite using it a lot, this hasn't sort of started to feather and break apart, which I really appreciate because I don't like the tips getting thicker as I continue to use them. And this side has like a much thicker, more sort of a fill-in type line. And this is similar to like a micron 0.5, I'd say, on that side. So, and that's the side I typically use unless I'm doing a fill. So it is nice to have this marker, and it came in a set of 4 where there was a green, a red, and a blue as well. Brave and quick with my ink lines, but having to do this underneath a camera for a live stream is a little bit different. And I thought it would be fun actually to see the inking for this because it's a small piece. It's very cute and fun. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's a simple piece that we're working on today. This is still hot press Arches watercolor paper. It's a tiny little piece of it actually, not a very big piece, smaller than I typically use. Nice to be able to use every last bit of your paper, and even for the thinner pieces. You can end up using it for bookmarks, and I mean, I don't typically end up using the really small pieces of paper, but I do think that they're good to keep around to swatch colors on too. But this was just big enough to turn into a little Valentine's Day piece. Zig pigment marker in black. Filbert, my round, I've got a 20/0 and I've got a 0 Da Vinci, and these are the ones that I've said that you should be familiar with some of these brushes because they've been out for the last few streams and because they've sort of worked for everything I've done so far. I've got my leftover palette from last time that has a mix of lots of things in it. I also have another palette over here that has a whole lot of different colors in it. Different blues and different reds and a few different yellows up there. So since I've got a full rainbow of colors out, then I can go ahead and use them. The theme for this is a light as air, love makes your heart soar feeling. So I thought that the hot air balloons worked well for that. Now, of course, if you're heartbroken, maybe your hot air balloon is tanking and rushing towards the ground as it loses air, but let's hope you have a full hot air balloon or just an expectant hot air balloon. Composition is a nice asymmetrical composition. As a result of having an odd number of objects, I'm going to end up inking an odd number of little balloons here that you add a little bit more interest. Even numbers tend to make people bored. Numbers like 2 and 4 because there's just the same amount to spread around. An odd number of things so your eye says, do I look this way or do I look the other way? So that's just a quick trick. And of course, if you want energy, then having a diagonal for your setup and having an asymmetrical setup adds a lot of energy and movement as well. So I ended up putting teeny hot air balloons in the distance, and it was for that reason, because I wanted to have an asymmetrical, energetic, full of whimsy sort of composition. And this is something that you can definitely follow along with me because this is a nice and simple, easy piece. So if you wanted to do something that was Valentine's Day themed just for fun or to give to somebody, this is a perfect thing to follow along with. Also for these further balloons, remember how we lose detail as you get further away? I'm not going to actually make my colors any duller because this is not a realism piece. As I get further away, I'm not going to make them bluer and I'm not going to make them duller, which is typical. But I did decide to decrease the amount of detail by just obviously making less stripes down the sides of these hot air balloons for colors to go in, but I think it's also nice to have, I mean, if you haven't guessed by now, these are going to be spectral, rainbow hued. It's very important that you get all of your extra pencil up before painting, and if you've inked, there's really no reason to have any pencil on there at all, so you can go ahead and lift all of it up. Let's quickly streak in our sky. I've also taped with masking tape this piece of watercolor paper down onto a piece of cardboard so I can rotate it better and not just be touching the edges. This is a good idea if you're painting all the way up to the edge. If you're not painting all the way up to the edge and you've got masking tape that's basically giving you a little border, or artist tape, if you want to use that. I've got both, but since I'm taping it on the back, I don't really feel any qualms about just using some masking tape back there. And just roll it up into a little round, sticky shape so that it goes, it's sticky in every direction. And as a result of that, you can just go ahead and pop your paper down. I think I've got 6 pieces of tape back there, 4 for the corners and 2 in the middle, and it'll just hold your paper down and it'll keep it from warping when it gets really wet, as long as you let it dry like that. So after you're done painting, let it dry taped on here and then take it off when it's dry, and then it'll dry flat. This is a nice cerulean blue, and you have to ask yourself what style you're going for, what mood you're going for. So don't want to do like an indigo blue back here, because that would be such a dark, low intensity blue. It won't fit the mood of the painting that I'm doing, which is this light-hearted, idealistic, sort of childlike hope for love. And you know, unless you are heartbroken, in which case you can make this a Batman and Gotham colored hot air balloon. And I can just follow the wet thread of the blue all along here. This is not a hard thing to do if you're putting on fresh paint that you've mixed up in your wells. If it starts to dry, use a damp brush to blend out the edge and then come back with more paint, because you don't want a hard edge in your sky, that's for sure. I've got one back here, and I'm actually just going to wet blend it out right now so that I don't have to worry about when I go back up there. It'll make it look like your sky is a fake paper sky of some sort if you let it have too many hard edges. And if you find that you're getting into a space where it's too hard to control all of these edges, then go ahead and dampen and smooth some of them out with water and come back and finish them later if you can't keep up with all of them. I think because this is small enough that I'm going to take my chances, and if things start to look scary, then we'll stop and I'll blend that out. So the spectral color scheme, I said, matches the mood. It also, the composition matches the mood, which is a free, soaring, asymmetrical, odd number of objects, and also a soft shapes, which sort of denote, based on what I was talking about last time in Molly Bang's book called How Pictures Work, that soft shapes, rounded shapes are comforting, are nurturing, give you a sense of peace and happiness. So that's why the rounded balloons give us that feeling. So all of that is adding to the mood we're going for. Now this is a slightly granular blue that I've got here. And so it's adding a little bit of texture to the sky. And notice how this cardboard is helping me considerably to keep my hand out of that wet paint. I think I might have made that a little bit too opaque, but I think I like it for now. And I can always lift out a highlight. Just take your brush without any paint in it, damp, and you can lift out a little bit. It'll give you a lovely little highlight. The techniques that I'm going to be using today are wet and dry. As you saw, I haven't done any wet and wet so far. And I'm going to do a wet and dry with a damp edge blending, which I'm going to show you right now. So it doesn't really matter that that's not even, because I'm going to go ahead and blend the edge out. Got a wet brush and blend the edge out. And that's because I do want a little bit of a highlight down the center. I would have liked to have kept that a little bit brighter. This is a staining red, which means that if you don't put it down wet on wet, it tends to soak in even if you come in with a blended edge. So I want to try to keep a lighter part in the middle there where I want the balloon to have a little bit of a highlight for each stripe. That way it looks like it's rounded, a rounded shape with a highlight. So I'm putting my red in. The best thing to do there is to use a thick red. If you put down a thicker color than the amount of water you have on your paper, then it won't bleed right into the water. It's always thicker over thinner, just like it is with oil and acrylic. And now this is letting me really pick up a nice blended edge. Okay. And in fact, that might be a little bit too sharp for what I wanted, but I can always go back and make it darker or lighter later. Watercolor does continue to lift and blend even after it dries, just not as much as it does when it's wet. And I do think from this angle that this looks too sharp to me, so I am going to pat, dab, and blend this down all along the side. We're going for that fluffy fabric that you have on hot air balloons, and a very simple way of creating that is to make sure you have dark edges and just a fluffy part down the middle. I'm going to try to keep it into a red orange because I don't want it to be too orange as a result of too much yellow, because if it does look too orange, then I'm going to lose the Valentine's Day look that I was aiming for in the center. And I'm going to take a stripe of water and take it down through the rest of this stripe. Also, after this stripe, I'm going to skip a stripe after I do it, because this is dangerous what I'm doing here. So I can end up with the red bleeding into the orange, and that'll happen in the next one if I keep doing this. So I don't want to press my luck, but I've got that edge blended out. And I also did some line inking, which we're done with, so there's not going to be much more inking going on, but it's just a simple line. Again, I used a pigment-based ink, and it's archival, so it's not blending and it's not re-wetting as I am going and painting this. And why do I not care about that line being even? Because I'm going to blend it right out with my little nylon scrubber. So you'll notice that I'm putting the paint down with a sable brush, and I'm blending it with a nylon brush. Remember, I said this in my materials video on YouTube, which is, please don't do all of your blending and lifting with your sable brushes if you want them to last a long time. You can lay down your color in delicate notes with your sable brushes, and then you can go ahead and lift and blend and scrub with your nylon brush, and that'll keep your sable brushes lasting 5 times as long as they would if you were just deciding to use them for everything. Don't make them the scrubbers, and don't make them the lifters. Okay, I'm going to come back in. Now, while this is wet, I can just keep going back and forth because I know blooms will occur, because I'm not putting in paint that's less thick than the water that's on the paper. As long as I put in paint that is the same thickness or more thick, there will be no blooms. I only get blooms if I put in paint that is more watery than the paint I already have down on the paper. And dabbing motions are great for blending too. So remember we talked about those. And this is an original piece that I'm working on, but I always like to talk about artists that are, if we're doing a study, then I talk about the artist whose piece we're studying. And if I'm doing an original piece, I like to talk about relevant. Probably Richard Scarry, or people often say Richard Scary, but I think it's actually pronounced Richard Scarry. Trying to mix a green and a teal for what I'd like. So I'm making this green right here. It's gonna be too watery for what I'm doing. Do you see how thin that is? It's gonna make stuff bleed. So that's what you don't want to do if you're gonna blend an edge. You wanna make sure your paint goes down pretty thick. So let me go ahead and blend the edge out for this so that it's not hardening while I wait. I have all the more redder colors near the center because of the Valentine's Day theme. And I think I'll only have one color edge here because it's near the side. By the chunkiness of this piece and the cuteness of this piece, it reminds me of Richard Scarry's work. So if you are going to go and try to look to see who else has worked in a similar way, then you can go check out his stuff. And I really liked how he had a great amount of detail and labels in a lot of his pictures. So you could go and read something and he'd have little labels next to the little animals like breakfast and all the different items and everything like that. But I think he moved to Europe near the end of his life, and then a lot of his illustrations started to like reflect, I think, whatever country he was living in, like Swedish architecture or something. So he was always a detail-oriented person, but he did these really stout-looking animals dressed in people's clothes, and they were colored with some kind of water media because they were transparent. So I don't know if he was using watercolor or ink or acrylic, but you can look into that. But it was very much a sort of pen and ink, chunky, cute look, which is very similar to what we're doing today. Another relevant artist who did ink work with watercolors, of course, Beatrix Potter, and I think she did her animals better than anybody else's anthropomorphic animals. They're just delicate and lovely and beautiful. Because the world was more sexist at the time, she headed towards fiction and picture books, but she started out doing botanical journaling of like different kinds of fungi. This channel on Twitch for me is only a few weeks old at this point, and as you guys might know, my mom was sick with cancer. She still is, so I had to take more than a year off of YouTube, so my channel just sort of sat around. So yeah, family is always first. My mom was here for more than 6 months, and I helped her while she was going through chemo, and I did have to put everything on hold, my work and also of course YouTube and everything else. So but I do have to take care of her some more. Then I'm going to try to do it so I can do both at the same time, hopefully, because I know that it'll make her feel better too, and it also gives me an outlet. Art is such a beautiful outlet for just de-stress and also to dream. You're just doing so much observation when you actually sit down and recreate something versus just looking at it. So no way to appreciate something like actually painting it or drawing it. In fact, I think that's what artists do, is they compliment, appreciate, they flatter their subjects by painting them. So Beatrix Potter loved fairy tales, everything from Grimm's to the Arabian Nights and everything, and you can sort of really see that influence in her own stories. She wrote stories that had a lot of fairy tale-like characters, and also the kind of danger and peril and real sort of like actual death and tension that you get in fairy tales, because fairy tales are really rather dark before we sort of completely sanitize them for cartoons. They have a lot of darkness in them. So you can see that when Peter Rabbit is in real danger of being killed, or they mention that Mr. McGregor killed his dad and his wife put him into a pie and that kind of thing like that. You're like, oh my god, some people are like, that's too dark for my child. But I mean, everybody who grew up reading that, nobody turned into an axe murderer. Besides, as a kid, you feel like you're in danger. You feel like everybody is larger than you and you have no power in the world. So I think reading those kinds of stories really made you relate to Peter Rabbit or Tom Kitten, when Tom Kitten was about to be put into a roly-poly pudding, or when Jemima Puddle Duck was about to be eaten by Mr. Todd the fox. I mean, it all seems very realistic to you as a child. You know that these kinds of things can happen, so I don't think there's any reason to keep them from children. I think that's a bad idea, in fact. Maybe I should have put a yellow-orange there first instead of a yellow, so that it makes a nice chunky area in the middle where there's more red. And of course, because this is watercolor, we can layer and it'll show through. So go ahead and do that right now. Get that nice stained glass glaze look. Where does the shape for the heart come from? Well, this shape that we now consider to be the heart shape, right? This famous heart shape that everybody world over mostly considers to be heart-like, right? This indented heart shape. But the heart as the heart has not been there for all of history. In fact, typically, I think it started, the modern idea of the heart as the heart shape that we think of it now didn't start till the 1200s. And it didn't actually become popular until around the 1500s. And before that, that kind of shape was just considered to be a decorative shape without having any modern association that we consider nowadays to the human heart or to love and affection. And it was also just considered to be foliage, like, an ivy leaf or a fig leaf, because they're shaped like that. They're shaped in that sort of what we now think of as a heart shape. Isn't that funny that people didn't always think that? And it makes sense to some extent, because the human heart doesn't look like this shape. fact, I remember reading that a 1200s era coat of arms with like a lion in the center, like a roaring lion, the way that you see in a lot of coat of arms, had some heart shapes all around it. And they look like modern hearts. They're like even red, but they're not meant to be hearts. They're meant to be like just some random shape on this coat of arms. I guess was supposed to be probably more noble and fearsome, and said it looks really cutesy because it's got like heart shapes all around it. So if we saw it today, we would not understand why somebody thought that was a good coat of arms. They wanted to look brave or fearsome. It's all about cultural differences and time differences. Oh, you know what I just realized? I totally skipped this part of the sky underneath my balloon area. But it's okay, I've got blue right here. Forgot to do this part of the sky. And, you know, I was considering maybe we can make those like thicker areas behind the parachute, but I don't know, it doesn't really make any sense, so I'm gonna go ahead and just color it in. I've got magenta, I don't actually have any purple on here, but I'm gonna take my blue. And I'm using my Da Vinci brush to do this, and that's also a bad idea. You should use your sable brushes, not for mixing either, so I'm doing that today because I'm being bad, but I really shouldn't. But anyway, if I add blue to this, it should start to go more purple. I think I want more blue than that. I've always liked these small weld mini palettes because it allows me to mix an entire spectrum of neutrals and separate them in little wells. So I can put my yellow at the top, my red on the side, my blue on this side, like I would on a color wheel, and then just mix all around in an entire circle, and then in the center I can mix the neutrals and everything. So it's very valuable for that, I've found. Okay, I think that's finally as purple as I would like it. But going back to discussing that heart shape, I think it was around 1250 in a Middle Ages medieval manuscript where a man is offering his heart to his sweetheart, and the shape that he has on his palm is vaguely heart-shaped, and that's like one of the first uses of the heart shape as a heart, but it looks kind of strange. And it's just like the heart tip is pointed upward, it's not pointing down like we associate it, and it doesn't really look very much heart-shaped. It actually almost looks like just what your heart looks like if you like, or you know, doing an operation on a real human being. So it doesn't look as much like a heart, but that's the first use of some vaguely heart-shaped shape is that medieval manuscript in around 1250. And then after that, I remember reading that in the 1300s was around the first time that there was an unambiguous actual real heart shape being used. And then it got popular in the 1400s and 1500s, and especially in the 1400s they put the heart shape in playing cards, so you know, like for the heart suit, and it was a heart shape the way that we have a modern association with the heart. And so that was that. After that, ever since that time, we've associated the heart with the heart shape that we now think of as the modern, that indented curved top with the pointed bottom. But it wasn't always so. Isn't that interesting? This spectral color scheme, by the way, it wouldn't have the name for it unless we had Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered the spectrum using a prism when he divided white light into spectral colors using a prism, and I think 1666, between somewhere around that time, a few years after 1666. The exact year I don't think is known. That's always intrigued me because I was a physics major in college, and I think that so much of optics and physics is just completely harmonious with painting and art. So you see me doing more of my damp edge blending right there. That's one of the reasons why I just can't help bringing some information in, where this last bit of the balloon, it should be blue because blue is the next color over this side of the spectrum, but I don't want it to match into the green sky, and since we had a teal here, I think I might just put a green here. Make it look like it didn't change colors till it came around the other side, which doesn't really make much sense, but we're going to pretend that that's what happened. And then we'll be rounding off that balloon and then doing more of the bottom. And you can see that I did all of this with wet on dry. It works really well for these smaller sized pieces, and I think one of the funny things about Richard Scarry's drawings that I just remembered right now, I remember reading this a while back, was they had to change some of his drawings and labels because they were a bit sexist. It's because he was born a long time ago, so he was doing some things where he would, I don't know, would sound kind of sexist towards the female or male roles, you know, nothing gigantic, nothing that makes him like condemnable to the point where you're like, I'm not going to read any books by this author, illustrator anymore, but the kind of social norms they had at the time. I just want to have a thicker green. There we are. It's a nice thick green. This is more of a yellow green too, which suits me because the bluer green it is, the more it's going to blend into the sky. Nice tip tapping all the way down. Just dab it to blend that edge. Don't add too much water. If you add too much water, it's going to bleed into that green and thin it out, and also it might bleed into your purple. This shape is just a bit big enough for me to add the green leading edge on that side and lift out down the center. See how well that works? This is what happens to me in my own head, is I think to myself, if I completely screw up a watercolor piece, you can turn it into a gouache piece. You can scrub most of the paint off of it and start all over and turn it into an opaque gouache piece, or you can just patch it up with some opaque gouache. You know, it's kind of hard actually, because I've always told you, or whoever you are, if you've been here before, that I'm kind of an introvert. So this is scary. It's scary coming on here and doing this, and my sharing a lot of information, it's my comfort zone actually. It's basically all I know how to do, is share a lot of information. So that's why I do it, is because it's how I make myself comfortable. And so part of my information sharing is I guess a self-defense or protective mechanism. Remember how Chris Rock said sometime, uncle or dad or grandfather or somebody thought that Robitussin would solve everything? It doesn't matter if your knee was hurting, you could pour some Robitussin cough syrup on it. Well, I think that's kind of what I think about gouache, which is that if you have an ink piece and you've screwed it up, well, use some gouache and cover it up. If you got a watercolor piece and you screwed it up, use some gouache and you can fix it. If you've got a gouache piece and you've screwed it up, then more gouache will fix it. As far as I'm concerned, that is the Robitussin of my art materials. That balloon is done, and it looks exactly like I wanted it to look, just simple and cheery. This wouldn't stand out very much if I made it purple or orange or any of those other colors. So I'm going to do a simple halfway around color. I also see that this heart leaked just a little bit. I'm going to scrub it off right there. Okay, so I've got half of it doing that. I do think I'm going to bring in a little bit of green on that side. Give it more of a rounded look. And you don't have to be a realism painter to do this piece, not even close. This is a very simple piece. Even if you've never done anything before, this is a good piece to start with. So I'll make the inside of that green. I think it's a little bit too blue-green in there, because now it's looking too much like the sky. So let me lift some of that out. You can't go wrong with putting in more red. I'm trying to make the whole thing look more like it's conducive to Valentine's Day. And go in and throw some more red, because as soon as you blend that out, it'll lighten because of the holiday we're associating it with. Then again, there's nobody sitting in that hot air balloon, so who threw the bag out? I don't know. I think I'll make the bag yellow. That seems like the only color I can think of that won't muddy up this area. And it seems like the right color for those white sacks is that they are kind of yellowy, kind of white. So go ahead and do that. I'm gonna have a red stripe. Blend out the edge. And I'm only going to do one side with the edge being blended. And I'm going to do all of my red stripes in at once because I have this color on my brush, and also it lets me see if I'm not being too monotonous about how I'm putting this in. Like an acrylic sealer or like a spray sealer, and you can put gouache on your car after the accident, and at least you'll have a pretty crashed car. It might be totaled, it might be dented, you might have a concussion, and your arm might be broken, but you'll have sealed a beautiful painting on the hood of your car or on the door of your car or wherever you decided to do it. Humor aside, painting is a great outlet to make yourself feel better. So I think if anything is going on in your life, even if things aren't going perfectly, if you've got some kind of creative outlet, whether it's painting or drawing or some kind of athletic outlet, if you love rock climbing or something like that, all those things will make you happier, I'm sure. So distract yourself from what you're not happy with by doing something that makes you happy. That's sometimes the only thing you have control over. That's one of the reasons why I like painting a lot myself, is that it is great escapism, isn't it? You didn't ask if you could pour Robitussin over the car if you got into a car accident, which I think might work just as well as gouache, so I don't think you should completely write that out. And besides, the nature of things getting more distant is that they're supposed to be harder to make out, otherwise they're not more distant, so don't worry about that. I just chose to show the stripes that are the part of the spectrum that'll make the heart look more red and magenta-y, and so that it reads more as hearts further away. Let's try to add a little bit more yellow into that green. That's actually against the rules for stuff getting further away, is that stuff should not be getting more yellow as it gets further away. It should be getting cooler. But I just wanted to show up a little bit better. I'm going to recap. Should I bring that in a little bit more deliberately? And we should recap. Does that look deliberate enough? Or okay, well anyway, we worked on a hot air balloon painting with heart shapes, and we talked about the history of the heart shape and how it developed in the 1200s and didn't become popular till the 1500s and become associated with the idea or symbol or metaphor for the heart that we know today, so the ideograph of the heart that we know today. And we also talked about some examples of that, including the manuscript or the coat of arms. We talked about relevant artists for this style, which is a cutesy, chunky pen and ink and watercolor style. And so I said Richard Scarry would be a good person to check out, who was an author-illustrator, American, published over 300 books and did some really cool things with water media. And also Beatrix Potter, somebody that I would always suggest to check out, one of my favorite author-illustrators. Talked about the style and composition. So this is an ink line in watercolor, and I said the theme here is that love makes your heart soar and it gives you a light as air feeling. So I wanted to do these balloons, which is going into the soaring part, and the heart shape gives the heart soaring, and the light as air is literally that they're up in air. So it was a very easy theme because of the subject that we chose. The composition is asymmetrical. It's a little bit bent over. If I'd made this balloon straight up and down, it would have been maybe a little bit less exciting. So it is a little bit tilted, and on top of that, I made it more asymmetrical with the bag and a few more of these hot air balloons receding in the distance. And I said earlier, and I'll reiterate, that diagonals are good for action and for movement, and it gives you more of the whimsical feeling that we're looking for in this. Also, there's an odd number of objects, so if you count the balloons, there's 7 balloons, or there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so that you have more interest here. We used a spectral color scheme, which is the rainbow hues, and that's because they denote happiness and dreams and idealism and childhood, and it works well for this subject here that we're trying to portray. The techniques I used were wet on dry, mostly with damp edge blending, some lifting, and the line inking at the beginning with the Zig pigment ink marker. And that's pretty much it. I really, really do appreciate it. Thanks for parking your brushes here, and please subscribe to my channel and comment and like, and check out the links in the description below for the other stuff that I do on my YouTube channel and other places. And until next time, hope you guys have fantastical painting adventures.